experiment within 6 days because the guards were so brutally abusing the prisoners that there were nervous breakdowns among the prisoners. Actually, he said that he stopped the experiment because his girlfriend told him that he had become the warden, and he started behaving not as a scientist looking out for the interest of his subjects, but as the warden of this prison. And he then testified in the Abu Ghraib hearing, talking about what are the conditions that normal people will behave in such incredibly evil ways. Or I think of another thing that moved me is the book Battalion 101, where it tells a story of 500 reservists in Poland in the 1940s. 500 reservists who had never really been trained particularly to be killers at all. 500 men over a very short period of time killed point blank 38,000 Jews and sent over 40,000 off to Treblinka. Ordinary men who at first were repelled and disgusted, but by the end, 90% of them participated in this slaughter. So what I think that we've got to get our heads around is both these profoundly pro-social qualities and recognize that it's not just the evil other. It's not just the Osama bin Laden or George Bush. It's not just the people that we don't like. No, if we really recognize that we are all capable, and we don't know if we're really capable of that level of evil until we're tested. So we have to assume that we are. So if we get that clear, it seems to me that our path gets a lot sharper. How do we get out of this downward spiral? It's by what? It's by looking at what are the conditions then that bring out the best in us, and what are the conditions that keep the worst of us in check. And I'm sure many of you will have answers to that, but I'll just say that 3 really strike me as pretty obvious, that bring out the worst, and the opposite of them bring out the best in us. And those are, 1, the concentration of power. 2, anonymity, secrecy, non-transparency. Think of what happened on Wall Street. The people who were doing all those fancy instruments and the credit default swaps and all those derivatives based on shaky real estate market. You know what their slogan was? It was, IBG, YBG. I'll be gone, you'll be gone. They knew that what they were doing was probably going to collapse, but they'd be out of there. It was anonymity. That doesn't work with human beings. So concentration of power, anonymity, and 3rd is othering, of scapegoating, as we see today with Glenn Beck and Limbaugh with the just scapegoating. It's them. And even people I know, it's the Tea Partiers. It's the other. So those 3 conditions, we're pretty certain now, bring out the worst in human beings. So it seems like we kind of know what to do. We flip them. We dissolve each of those conditions. And so the rest of my talk, I want to quickly talk about how then we create this spiral of possibility. We create the spiral of possibility with starting with the premise that there is enough, both goods and goodness, and that we can now decipher what are these conditions. And we can then look. You see, I think we hear the expression, seeing is believing, but I think believing is seeing. And we have to believe in the possibility of the new in order to see it. And so I want to, in the rest of my minutes with you, I want to just share with you then how I see people actually stepping up and dissolving each of these negative conditions and creating the flip. In other words, the flip of number 1 is the dispersion of power, so that we're all not just dividing up a pie of power, but actually co-creating new power. Or how are we dissolving anonymity? By creating face-to-face communities in which we are known and accountable. And 3rd, how do we stop the blame game and step up to recognize our mutual accountability? I mean, even Wall Street, for example. It's so easy for me, as many, I'm sure, to get so angry about what went on Wall Street that created global, massive increase in global hunger and dislocation and suffering and countless misery. And yet, we also have to take responsibility because we let it happen. In some way, we condone the pulling away of the kind of regulation and transparency that would have prevented that from happening. So I think that what excites me and what keeps me going then is this sense that we can see our way through now to a different way of thinking of democracy itself. No longer this failed idea of democracy as something done to us or for us, the notion that we can just trust concentrated power and trust the magic of the market, and rather democracy not as a set system that's finished and done that we inherited, but democracy as a set of values that permeate every aspect of our lives together, so that these values show up in education, they show up in the economy, they show up in politics, they show up in cultural life. Values, what values? The values of mutual accountability, the values of fairness, the values of inclusion, and I believe, and what gets me up in the morning, as I say, is that I see this, they may not call it living democracy, but I see it emerging in all over the world, and I just want to bring a couple of examples here from our own country, and from abroad as well. So I just want to start with economic life, because I think that's the hardest for people to imagine. What would a democratic economy look like, especially now that the S word is a new curse word? So I prefer, and I've always preferred, to talk about a democratic economy. What does that look like at the level of the enterprise, at the level of the economy? Well, I was struck recently looking at a democratic enterprise, understood, as all of you certainly know, is the structure of a cooperative, where it's not a one person, it is a one person, one vote, not a one share, one vote. And I realized that rather than being marginal, as most of us think of, oh, cooperatives, they're nice, but they're kind of marginal, actually, I estimate that about as many people in the world are members of cooperatives than own shares in publicly traded companies. And does that surprise you? Because it really did surprise me. But then I look at a country like India, for example, and again, the media tells us what the dominant image of the world is. What do we hear about? The high-tech boom in India. But actually, village level, women creating dairy co-ops in India, there are now about over 13 million women involved in creating over 100,000 dairy co-ops that create a fifth of the milk production in India and made India a major milk producer. All cooperatives that have created about 6 times, I calculate, 6 times more jobs than the entire high-tech industry, right? And it's all based on this cooperative model. And of course, then I jump to the United States and I think, oh, dairy co-op, what is that? What bell does that ring? And then I go back to sitting, this is a story on me, Ye of Little Faith, where I was sitting in a pew in western Wisconsin, Viroqua, Wisconsin in 1988, and I met this handful of farmers who were desperate because their friends were going out of business, some had committed suicide, and they said, you know, we want to start an organic dairy co-op. You know where this is going? Yeah. So I said, oh, that's nice, that'll help a few people in western Wisconsin, and that's great. And here we are in the year 2010, and now 1,400 farmers and a $500 million business, and you know the label Organic Valley. So I'm saying that this is a vision of a market, yes, but driven by principles that are more democratic than a single owner in control that we think of as essential to a market economy. I think of the region of Emilia-Romagna in Italy, where 1/3 of the economy is produced by not large co-ops, but co-ops of around 50 members or so, and Emilia-Romagna is one of the wealthiest regions in all of Europe. So at the level of the enterprise, but also at the level of the level of our communities, and I talk to many people here who are part of not just creating new farmers markets and new school-to-farm programs and that sort of thing, but I would call it a local living economy.